The gleaming halls of Riverside Preparatory Academy stretched before Zara Thompson like an endless maze, each polished tile reflecting the morning sunlight that streamed through towering windows. At 16, she'd grown accustomed to being the new student. Her mother's groundbreaking research had moved them across 3 states in the past 5 years. But something about this place, with its ivy-covered walls and centuries of tradition, made her heart flutter differently. Clutching her schedule, Zara's fingers traced the words, AP Chemistry, Room 412, Ms. Eleanor Winters. She'd heard whispers about Ms. Winters in the administrative office while collecting her paperwork, a teacher with 30 years of experience, multiple teaching awards, and a reputation for sending students to Ivy League chemistry programs. What Zara hadn't heard were the whispers that followed her own footsteps as she navigated the corridor. The sideways glances from students who rarely saw faces like hers in Riverside's hallowed halls. The AP Chemistry classroom smelled of recently sanitized lab equipment and fresh, dry erase markers. Zara arrived 5 minutes early, choosing a seat in the middle row. Not too eager in the front, not hiding in the back. Other students filtered in, their designer backpacks and confident postures speaking volumes about the privilege that surrounded her. A few offered curious smiles, while others became suddenly fascinated with their phones. Ms. Winters swept into the room precisely as the bell rang, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun, wire-rimmed glasses perched on her narrow nose. She moved with the authority of someone who considered their classroom a personal kingdom. The class fell silent without her having to say a word. Today, Ms. Winters announced, lifting her attendance sheet, "We have a new addition to our advanced placement family." Her eyes found Zara, and something flickered across her face, so quick that most students missed it. But Zara caught it. She'd seen that look before, surprise mixed with something darker, more judgmental. The teacher's Mont Blanc pen moved down the list with practiced precision until it reached Zara's name. Then, instead of a simple checkmark, Ms. Winters drew a bold line through it. The scratching sound echoed in the silent room. "Zara Thompson," she called out, her tone carrying a note of skepticism that made several students shift uncomfortably in their seats. "I see you've transferred from—" She paused, adjusting her glasses, "Roosevelt Public High School." "Yes, ma'am," Zara responded, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. She'd earned her place here. She knew that in her bones. "How interesting." Ms. Winters set down her pen and folded her hands. "You understand, of course, that Riverside Preparatory maintains certain academic standards. I'll need to see verification of your advanced placement qualification. We wouldn't want you struggling to keep up." A hot flush crept up Zara's neck as she reached into her meticulously organized folder. She'd anticipated something like this. Her mother had taught her to always be prepared. With steady hands, she pulled out her perfect AP qualification scores, her previous chemistry awards, and recommendations from 3 different teachers. Ms. Winters' heels clicked against the floor as she approached Zara's desk, each step deliberate and measuring. She examined the documents with exaggerated thoroughness, holding them up to the light as if checking for watermarks. Several students exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others watched with poorly concealed fascination. "Well," Ms. Winters finally said, her tight-lipped smile failing to reach her steel-gray eyes, "we'll see how long you last in my program, Ms. Thompson." She set the documents down on Zara's desk with a sharp tap. "I do hope you can keep up with our rigorous standards." Zara sat straighter, meeting Ms. Winters' gaze. Behind her carefully neutral expression, her mind was already racing through chemical equations and molecular structures, knowledge that had been her constant companion since she was old enough to peek over her mother's laboratory bench. "I look forward to the challenge, Ms. Winters," she replied, her voice carrying a quiet confidence that made her teacher's smile falter for just a moment. As Ms. Winters turned away, Zara caught a glimpse of a small periodic table tattooed on the wrist of the girl sitting next to her. The girl offered a subtle thumbs up beneath her desk, and Zara felt a small spark of hope. She might be in for a battle, but perhaps she wouldn't be fighting it entirely alone. 2 weeks into the semester, Zora's laboratory notebook had become a battlefield. Each meticulously documented experiment bore Ms. Winter's red pen marks like war wounds, circles around perfectly balanced equations, question marks beside flawless observations, and margins filled with increasingly nitpicky comments. Yet it wasn't the corrections that kept Zora awake at night. It was the calculated precision of Ms. Winter's campaign to break her spirit. Today's laboratory demonstration on catalytic reactions had drawn a small crowd of visitors, department heads eager to observe Ms. Winter's famous teaching methods. Zora stood at her workstation, measuring potassium iodide with the steady hands she'd inherited from her mother. The other students worked in pairs, their quiet chatter filling the lab with nervous energy, but Ms. Winters had insisted Zora work alone to properly assess her capabilities. "Miss Thompson," Ms. Winters' voice cut through the room like a scalpel, "surely you don't intend to use that concentration." She loomed over Zora's shoulder, her breath mint-sharp and uncomfortably close. "Perhaps in your previous school, precision was optional." Several students paused their work, watching. Among them was Maya Chen, the girl with the periodic table tattoo, who had been secretly sharing her notes with Zora after particularly difficult classes. Her face showed a mixture of concern and anger as she watched the scene unfold. "The concentration is correct, Ms. Winters," Zora replied softly, gesturing to her calculations. "For optimal catalyst activity, we need—" "Oh." Ms. Winters raised an eyebrow, making a show of examining Zora's work for the observing faculty. "Well, since you're so confident." Her elbow moved, seemingly adjusting her blazer, but the motion sent Zora's carefully measured solution splashing across the workbench. "Oh dear, how clumsy of me. You'll have to start over." Time ticked away as Zora methodically cleaned the spill and began again, her heart pounding but her exterior calm. She could feel the weight of the visitors' stares, could hear their whispers. This was what Ms. Winters wanted, to prove Zora didn't belong in her advanced class, to make her crack under pressure. But pressure was something Zora understood intimately. Pressure was what turned carbon into diamonds, what drove chemical reactions forward, what her mother had faced breaking barriers in her own career. As she carefully measured the solution again, she recalled her mother's words. "Excellence isn't just about knowing the right answers. It's about maintaining your dignity when others try to strip it away." The class period was nearly over when Zora finally completed her demonstration. Despite the delay, her results were perfect. The solution changing color exactly as predicted, the reaction rate matching theoretical calculations to 3 decimal places. A few students nodded in appreciation, while others looked away guiltily, knowing what was coming. "Well," Ms. Winters announced, her voice dripping with false concern, "it seems Ms. Thompson has finally managed to complete the basic demonstration, though her timing leaves much to be desired. In the real world of chemistry, speed and efficiency are just as important as accuracy." After class, as students filed out, Maya lingered behind. "That was incredible," she whispered to Zora. "Your calculation method was actually better than what's in the textbook." But their conversation was cut short by Ms. Winters' sharp cough. "Ms. Chen, I'm sure you have somewhere to be," the teacher said pointedly. "And Miss Thompson, do stay a moment. We need to discuss your performance issues." What followed was a 15-minute lecture on maintaining academic standards and whether advanced placement is the right fit. Each word was carefully chosen to sound reasonable to an outsider while carrying clear undertones of bias. Ms. Winters ended by assigning Zora extra practice problems, work that went far beyond the regular curriculum. That evening, as Zora tackled the extra assignments, she noticed something unexpected. The problems Ms. Winters had chosen weren't just difficult, they were graduate-level challenges. A small smile crossed her face as she reached for her mother's advanced chemistry reference books. If Ms. Winters wanted to test her limits, she was in for a surprise. Sometimes the best way to fight back was to excel beyond anyone's expectations. The basement laboratory in the Thompson home hummed with energy at midnight, a stark contrast to the silent neighborhood above. Here, surrounded by equipment that would make most university labs envious, Zara found her sanctuary. Blue LED lights cast a gentle glow over precisely arranged beakers and testing equipment, while multiple monitors displayed complex molecular structures rotating in 3D. Dr. Janelle Thompson stood at the main workbench, her NASA lab coat exchanged for a comfortable MIT alumni sweatshirt, her locks pulled back in a silk scarf. She watched her daughter methodically solve Ms. Winter's extra credit problems, noting how Zara's fingers tightened around her pencil at particularly challenging sections. "Baby girl," Dr. Thompson said softly, sliding a cup of chamomile tea across the pristine lab surface. "You know you don't have to prove anything to her." She gestured at the complex equations Zara had been working on for the past 3 hours. "These problems, they're well beyond AP level. This is graduate work." Zara looked up, dark circles under her eyes betraying her exhaustion, but her voice remained steady. "That's exactly why I have to solve them, Mom. She thinks she's setting me up to fail, but she doesn't know who I am, who we are." Dr. Thompson smiled, remembering similar battles from her own journey, being the only black woman in her doctoral program, fighting for recognition at NASA, proving herself repeatedly despite her groundbreaking work on sustainable rocket fuel. She pulled up a holographic display of her latest project, a revolutionary propulsion system for the upcoming Mars mission. "Come here," she beckoned. "Let's take a break from Ms. Winter's mind games. I could use your insight on this fuel mixture ratio." Zara's eyes lit up as she studied the molecular structure rotating before them. This was their ritual, mother and daughter, scientists without pretense, exploring the boundaries of human knowledge together. Here, in their private lab, there were no doubts about her abilities, no raised eyebrows at her achievements. "The hydrogen bonds are unstable," Zara pointed out, manipulating the hologram with practiced ease. "But if we introduce a catalyst..." Her fingers danced across the keyboard, making adjustments. The simulation ran, showing improved stability. Dr. Thompson watched proudly as her daughter worked, remembering the 3-year-old who used to sit on her lap during video conferences with the GPL team, already fascinated by chemical reactions. Now that little girl was fighting her own battles, facing the same prejudices that had dogged her mother's career. "Mom," Zara said suddenly, looking up from the simulation, "why didn't you tell the school who you are? One word from you and Ms. Winters would what?" Dr. Thompson interrupted gently. "Treat you fairly because your mother is successful. That's not the victory you need, baby girl." She pulled up another hologram, this one showing newspaper clippings from her early career. "Every black woman in science has faced someone like Ms. Winters. They see our skin before they see our minds. But we don't win by using privilege or power. We win by being undeniable." Zara nodded, understanding flooding her features. She turned back to Ms. Winter's problems with renewed determination. "Then help me be undeniable, Mom. Show me what's beyond these equations." For the next 2 hours, mother and daughter worked side by side, moving between Ms. Winter's assignments and real-world applications. Dr. Thompson explained how each principle Zara was learning applied to her work at NASA, transforming dry textbook problems into living science. As dawn approached, Zara completed the last problem, adding detailed explanations that drew on concepts well beyond the AP curriculum. Dr. Thompson reviewed her work, adding suggestions not for correction, but for expansion, ways to demonstrate understanding that would be impossible to dismiss. "Remember," Dr. Thompson said as they finally prepared to catch a few hours of sleep, "you're not just solving chemistry problems. You're showing every girl who looks like you that she belongs in that classroom too." She hugged her daughter tightly. "Your victory will be their permission to dream." Zara gathered her papers, exhausted but proud. Tomorrow, she would walk into Ms. Winter's class, armed not just with complete solutions, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned at the feet of giants. Let Ms. Winters check her work against the textbook. These answers came from the cutting edge of science itself. The autumn sun streaming through the laboratory windows did nothing to warm the chill that settled over AP Chemistry that Wednesday morning. Today's experiment, synthesizing a complex organic compound, was meant to be the semester's defining project, worth 30% of their final grade. Students huddled in their usual pairs, whispering nervously as they reviewed procedures. Ms. Winters stood at the front of the class, her gray blazer immaculate as always, holding a stack of lab partner assignments. As this is such a crucial experiment, she announced, her eyes fixing on Zara, I've taken the liberty of arranging optimal partnerships based on demonstrated abilities. She read through the pairs methodically, each name matching with another, until only 3 students remained: Maya Chen, Thomas Bradford, and Zara. Maya straightened hopefully. She and Zara had been quietly excelling together on recent assignments. Mr. Bradford and Ms. Chen, Ms. Winters declared with a thin smile, you'll work together. She turned to Zara, voice dripping with false concern. Ms. Thompson, given your unique approach to chemistry, I believe working alone will give us the clearest picture of your actual capabilities. Maya's hand shot up. Ms. Winters, I prefer to. That wasn't a suggestion, Ms. Chen. Ms. Winters cut her off sharply. Return to your assigned station. Zara unpacked her equipment with deliberate calm, though her hands trembled slightly. From her peripheral vision, she noticed Maya discreetly sliding her phone out, propping it against her textbook at an angle that captured both Zara's station and Ms. Winters' desk. The experiment began. The procedure required precise timing, careful measurement, and constant monitoring of temperature changes. Working alone meant Zara had to maintain multiple processes simultaneously, measuring reagents while monitoring heat levels, recording data while adjusting conditions. She moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory from countless hours in her home lab taking over. Ms. Winters circled the room, offering guidance to other pairs, but lingering near Zara's station like a storm cloud. Careful with that measurement, Miss Thompson, she would say, or, are you certain about that temperature? Each comment seemed designed to break Zara's concentration. Despite the pressure, Zara's solution began to take on the characteristic pale blue color indicating a successful synthesis. Her data readings aligned perfectly with theoretical predictions. She was not just completing the experiment, she was excelling. That's when it happened. Ms. Winters stopped at Zara's station, examining her lab notebook with exaggerated scrutiny. Interesting, she said loudly, drawing the attention of nearby students. Your results seem remarkably perfect. Her voice carried an unmistakable accusation. I followed the procedure exactly, Zara replied, her voice steadied despite her racing heart. Did you? Ms. Winters picked up Zara's lab notebook, flipping through the pages with theatrical skepticism. It seems statistically improbable that a single student, working alone, could achieve better results than pairs of our highest-performing students. The room fell silent. Even the gentle bubbling of solutions seemed muted. Are you accusing me of cheating? Zara asked quietly, her mother's words about dignity echoing in her mind. I'm simply saying, Ms. Winters replied, her voice carrying across the silent lab, that some results require explanation. Perhaps you'd like to share what resources you had access to before class, or who might have helped you prepare. The implication hung heavy in the air. Zara felt heat rising in her cheeks, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Years of practicing reactions, of learning from her mother, of loving chemistry, all reduced to an accusation of dishonesty because she dared to succeed while black. The only person who helped me, Zara said, her voice breaking slightly, is my mother, who taught me that excellence isn't a crime, and that my brain isn't limited by your expectations of my skin color. Ms. Winters' face flushed red. In one swift motion, she grabbed Zara's lab notebook and dropped it into the chemical waste container. "Oops," she said coldly. "It seems your results have been contaminated. I'm afraid you'll receive a 0 for today's work." Maya's phone captured it all. The deliberate sabotage, the tears finally spilling down Zora's cheeks, the shocked faces of classmates. In the back of the room, Thomas Bradford quietly pressed send on a mass email to the school board, attaching the video Maya had been recording since the start of class. The breaking point had arrived, but it wasn't Zora who would end up broken. By sunrise the next morning, the video had spread through Riverside Prep like a chemical reaction, impossible to contain. Students huddled over phones in hallways, sharing footage of Ms. Winter's calculated cruelty with a mixture of horror and recognition. Some whispered about similar incidents they'd witnessed but never reported, while others struggled with their own complicity in remaining silent. Principal Harrison's office buzzed with crisis management energy. His secretary fielded calls from concerned parents, local news outlets, and even the NAACP. On his desk, dozens of emails from former students detailed their own experiences with Ms. Winter's selective standards. The teacher's prestigious reputation was unraveling like a sweater caught on a nail. "Damage control," Harrison muttered, scanning the latest email from the school board. "We need something big, something immediate." His eyes fell on a brochure for NASA's educational outreach program, and an idea began to form. Meanwhile, in the teacher's lounge, Ms. Winters maintained her composure despite the obvious shift in atmosphere. Colleagues who once laughed at her jokes now found reasons to eat lunch elsewhere. She typed furiously on her laptop, preparing a defense of her high academic standards for the upcoming board review. "The STEM Symposium," she announced suddenly to the nearly empty room. "I should chair it. Show everyone that I'm committed to educational excellence for all students." The irony of her words hung heavy in the air, met only with uncomfortable silence from the few remaining teachers. Across town, in the classified research wing of NASA's local facility, Dr. Janelle Thompson reviewed an unexpected email. The message, marked urgent from Riverside Preparatory Academy, requested her presence as a keynote speaker at their hastily organized STEM symposium. The topic: Breaking Barriers in Scientific Achievement. "Mom," Zora called from the doorway of her mother's office, still dressed in her school uniform. "Maya sent me something you should see." She held up her phone, displaying dozens of messages of support from students and their parents, including video clips of past incidents involving Ms. Winters. Dr. Thompson read the symposium invitation again, noting they had no idea of her connection to their school. A plan began crystallizing in her mind, one that would transform this crisis into an opportunity for lasting change. Back at Riverside, the administration scrambled to prepare for the symposium. Banners celebrating diversity in STEM fields appeared in hallways that had been monochromatic for generations. Ms. Winters, desperate to maintain control of her narrative, volunteered to introduce the keynote speaker, a role eagerly granted by administrators hoping to showcase their commitment to change. "The speaker's identity is being kept confidential for security reasons," Principal Harrison explained at an emergency faculty meeting. Given their high-profile position in the scientific community, Ms. Winters preened, assuming the mystery guest must be someone from her extensive professional network. That afternoon, Zara sat in her usual seat in AP Chemistry, enduring Ms. Winters' attempts to proceed as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Students openly recorded the class now, documenting every interaction. The teacher's formerly subtle jabs became clumsier under the constant scrutiny. "Perhaps," Ms. Winters said tightly, passing back exams, "some of you could benefit from watching how a real scientist presents themselves at the symposium." Her pointed look at Zara carried weeks of accumulated bitterness. Zara accepted her paper, another perfect score marked down for unclear methodology, and allowed herself a small smile. She thought of her mother's NASA lab coat hanging at home, of the classified research that had revolutionized space travel, of the moment approaching when all masks would fall away. The symposium was scheduled for Friday afternoon. As custodians arranged chairs in the auditorium and tech crews tested the sound system, A deeper current of anticipation ran through the school. Students whispered about rumors that the mystery speaker was someone revolutionary, someone who would shake the foundations of Riverside's old guard. In her office, Ms. Winters polished her introduction speech, unaware that every carefully chosen word about maintaining standards and proper scientific methodology would soon become evidence against her. The catalyst for change was approaching, and like all powerful catalysts, it would transform everything it touched. Riverside Prep's auditorium buzzed with anticipation on Friday afternoon. Students filed in wearing their formal uniforms, many clutching phones ready to document what the school's hastily organized damage control effort would produce. In the front row, Ms. Winters sat with perfect posture, her silver hair freshly styled and her navy blazer immaculate, rehearsing her introduction speech under her breath. Behind the stage curtain, Principal Harrison paced nervously. "Our keynote speaker is still not here," he muttered to his assistant. "Are you certain they confirmed?" The assistant nodded, checking her tablet again. "They said they'd arrive exactly on schedule, sir. Something about completing an important experiment first." The clock struck 2, and Principal Harrison stepped up to the podium, mopping his brow. "Welcome to Riverside Preparatory Academy's first annual STEM Excellence Symposium," he announced, his voice carrying a forced cheerfulness. "To introduce our distinguished speaker, please welcome Ms. Eleanor Winters, our veteran AP chemistry teacher." Ms. Winters approached the podium with the confidence of someone who believed they were about to reclaim their narrative. "In my 30 years of teaching," she began, "I've maintained the highest standards of scientific excellence. Today's speaker exemplifies these standards, a brilliant mind who understands that true achievement comes only through rigorous validation of one's capabilities." In the middle row, Zara sat between Maya and Thomas, fighting to keep her expression neutral. Maya squeezed her hand supportively, while Thomas continued his weeks-long documentation, his camera trained on Ms. Winters. "Science demands precision," Ms. Winters continued, warming to her theme. "It requires us to question results that seem too perfect, to challenge those who might take shortcuts to success." Her eyes found Zara in the crowd, her meaning clear to everyone who had seen the viral video. The side door of the auditorium opened soundlessly. A tall figure in a NASA flight jacket entered, patches glinting under the lights. Students began to whisper and point, but Ms. Winters was too engrossed in her speech to notice. "So it is my great pleasure to introduce someone who truly understands the importance of maintaining standards in scientific education." Ms. Winters faltered as she finally registered the mounting murmurs in the audience. She turned just as Dr. Janelle Thompson stepped onto the stage. The NASA insignia on Dr. Thompson's jacket seemed to glow under the stage lights. Her locks were pulled back in a professional twist, her bearing that of someone who had commanded research teams and advised presidents. But it was her face, so startlingly similar to Zara's, that caused Ms. Winters to take an involuntary step backward. "Thank you for that introduction, Ms. Winters," Dr. Thompson said smoothly, her voice carrying the authority of decades of groundbreaking research. "I believe you know my daughter, Zara. She's in your AP chemistry class." The audience erupted in gasps and exclamations. Phones rose like a wave as students rushed to capture the moment. Ms. Winters stood frozen, her carefully prepared notes slipping from nerveless fingers to scatter across the stage. "Today," Dr. Thompson continued, moving to the podium as Ms. Winters stumbled back, "I'd like to talk about barriers in science. Not just the physical barriers my work at NASA helps overcome, but the artificial barriers some people create." She pressed a button, and behind her, a screen lit up with 2 images, her own graduate school thesis on catalyst optimization, and Zara's impossible lab results that Ms. Winters had destroyed. "These 2 documents," Dr. Thompson said, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent auditorium, "show identical approaches to solving complex chemical equations. One earned me a PhD and led to breakthroughs in rocket fuel technology. The other," she paused, looking directly at Ms. Winters, "earned my daughter accusations of cheating. The only difference, the color of the hands that wrote them." Ms. Winters sank into her chair, her face ashen. In the audience, Principal Harrison was frantically typing on his phone, likely calling an emergency board meeting. But Dr. Thompson wasn't finished. She had orchestrated this moment not just for Zara, but for every student who had ever been told they didn't belong. "Let's talk about standards," she said, bringing up the next slide. "Real standards, scientific standards. And most importantly, let's talk about the cost of prejudice in education, not just to individuals, but to human progress itself." Principal Harrison's office had never felt smaller than it did the following Monday morning. Dr. Janelle Thompson sat poised in one of the leather chairs, her NASA credentials and research portfolio spread across the mahogany desk. Beside her, Zara sat straight-backed, no longer the vulnerable student, but a young scientist whose brilliance had been vindicated. Across from them, Ms. Winters seemed to have aged a decade over the weekend, her usually impeccable appearance showing signs of strain. "Let's review the evidence," Dr. Thompson began, her voice carrying the same authority that had commanded mission control during critical launches. She lifted a thick folder. "I have here 17 documented incidents of discriminatory grading practices, 34 witness statements from current and former students, and," she paused, placing a USB drive on the desk, "complete security footage showing systematic harassment of my daughter." "This is absurd," Ms. Winters interrupted, her voice wavering. "I maintain the highest standards for all my students. If some aren't capable of meeting those standards, like this standard," Dr. Thompson smoothly interjected, producing Zora's destroyed lab notebook. Somehow, she had retrieved it from a chemical waste bin. The pages, though stained, had been carefully preserved and analyzed. "My team at NASA's forensic lab found these results not only accurate but innovative. In fact," she added, pulling out another document, "we filed a provisional patent based on the catalyst optimization method my daughter developed." Principal Harrison's eyes widened. The school board representatives present exchanged alarmed looks. One of them, a lawyer, began frantically writing notes. Ms. Winters started, then stopped, her carefully constructed defenses crumbling. "You don't understand the pressure to maintain our school's reputation. Our college placement rates." "Let's talk about college placement," Dr. Thompson cut in. She projected a series of graphs onto the office wall. "These show the correlation between your grading patterns and student demographics over the past decade. Would you care to explain why students of color in your classes consistently received lower grades for identical work?" The data was devastating in its clarity. Year after year, the pattern emerged, a systematic bias so clear it could have been a textbook example of discrimination. "I've already been contacted by the Department of Education's Civil Rights Division," Principal Harrison added, his face grave. "They're very interested in these findings." Ms. Winters seemed to deflate. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. "Want?" Dr. Thompson raised an eyebrow. "I want what every parent wants, for their child to be judged by their abilities, not their appearance. But this isn't just about Zara anymore." She stood, commanding the room's attention. "Tomorrow, every major scientific journal will receive a paper I've written about educational bias in STEM fields, using this case as a primary example. Your name won't be mentioned. This isn't about public shame. It's about systemic change." "You're destroying my career," Ms. Winters whispered. "No," Zora spoke for the first time, her voice clear and confident. "You're being offered a chance to be part of the solution." She pulled out a document of her own. "This is a proposal for a comprehensive reform program. Bias training is just the beginning. We want to establish mentorship programs, revise grading rubrics for objectivity, and create accountability systems." The school board representatives leaned forward, suddenly interested. This was no longer just damage control. It was an opportunity for Riverside Prep to become a model for institutional change. "The choice is yours, Ms. Winters," Dr. Thompson concluded. "Resign quietly and maintain your reputation, or join us in building something better." You have extensive experience that could be valuable if you're willing to confront your own biases and help prevent others from making the same mistakes." The room fell silent. Ms. Winters stared at her hands, her carefully constructed world of academic authority lying in ruins around her. Finally, she looked up, meeting Zora's eyes for the first time without prejudice. "I never thought," she began, then stopped, seeming to really see her student for the first time. "I would like to learn," she said quietly, "if you're willing to teach me." Dr. Thompson nodded, satisfaction flickering across her face. This wasn't just a victory, it was a transformation. As she gathered her documents, she caught Zora's eye and smiled. They had come seeking justice, but might achieve something far more valuable: change. 1 year later, the chemistry lab at Riverside Preparatory Academy looked markedly different. Gone were the rigid rows of individual workstations. Instead, collaborative pods encouraged group work, while the walls displayed student research projects from diverse cultural perspectives. Most striking was the new plaque beside the door, the Thompson Winters Initiative for Inclusive Scientific Excellence. Ms. Winters stood at the front of the room, but her demeanor had transformed as dramatically as the space around her. The severe bun had given way to a softer style, and her once intimidating presence now carried an air of thoughtful mentorship. She was introducing a special presentation to a packed audience of students, parents, and educators from across the country. "A year ago," she began, her voice carrying genuine emotion, "I stood in this room believing I knew everything about teaching chemistry. I was wrong. Today, I'm honored to introduce two people who taught me the most important lesson of my career: that excellence knows no color, and true education requires us to examine our own biases first." Zora and Dr. Thompson stepped forward, now familiar figures at Riverside. Zora, a senior preparing for early admission to MIT, carried herself with quiet confidence. The periodic table tattoo that once belonged to Maya was now replicated on her own wrist, a symbol of solidarity that had spread through the science department. The Thompson Winters Initiative began as a response to discrimination, Zora explained, bringing up their presentation. But it's evolved into something much more powerful. She clicked to the first slide, showing statistics that made the audience sit up straighter. In 1 year, Dr. Thompson continued, we've seen a 200% increase in minority student enrollment in advanced STEM courses. Our mentorship program has paired 50 students with working scientists, and 3 of our research projects have received national recognition. Ms. Winters stepped forward again. But numbers don't tell the whole story, she said, gesturing to the back of the room where Thomas Bradford was setting up a video compilation. These are the real changes. The video showed scenes from throughout the year. Ms. Winters attending diversity workshops, initially tense, but gradually becoming more engaged. Zara leading study groups where students from all backgrounds collaborated freely. Dr. Thompson conducting virtual labs from NASA, making cutting-edge science accessible to everyone. The hardest part, Ms. Winters admitted, her voice thick with emotion, was confronting my own prejudices. Each day, I discover new ways my high standards were really just barriers in disguise. But watching these students soar once those barriers came down. She paused, composing herself. Well, that's better than any teaching award I've ever received. The presentation continued with announcements of new initiatives, a summer research program at NASA, a revised grading system that emphasized creativity and problem-solving over memorization, and a partnership with other schools to spread the model nationwide. Near the end, Zara shared her own news. I've been accepted into MIT's chemical engineering program, she announced, prompting applause. But more importantly, I'll be continuing to work with Riverside Prep remotely, helping to expand this program. Because this isn't just about one student or one teacher anymore. It's about changing the face of science education. Maya Chen, now a senior class representative, stepped up to the podium. And we're just getting started, she declared. Next year, we'll be hosting the first national conference on inclusive STEM education right here at Riverside. As the presentation concluded, Dr. Thompson had one final surprise. The patent developed from Zora's impossible lab results, she revealed. It's just been approved. The royalties will fund scholarships for minority students in STEM fields, the Winters Transformation Grants. Ms. Winters' eyes filled with tears at this unexpected grace. The audience rose in a standing ovation. But the most powerful moment came after the formal presentation. In the lab, now cleared of chairs, current and former students gathered around the demonstration table. Ms. Winters and Zara stood side by side, conducting an experiment together, their easy collaboration a living testament to the power of transformation. Sometimes, Dr. Thompson observed, watching them work, the most important chemical reactions are the ones that change hearts and minds. She smiled at a group of young black girls watching the experiment with shining eyes. And those changes, they catalyzed generations. The lab filled with the sounds of scientific discovery and uninhibited learning, a symphony of voices and ideas that would have been impossible a year ago. The breaking point had become a turning point, and its ripples would transform countless lives in the years to come.